Can you believe this guy, Dr. Fauci? While we've been suffering, while we've been worried, while people have been dying, he has been writing a book. Son of a gun, he's been writing a book. Expect the unexpected, 10 lessons on truth, service, and the way forward. He doesn't know about any of those things, especially the truth part. Look, I don't think he's a very good doctor. Maybe he is in his circles, but we've all been confused by him, right? It was a year and a half ago, right here, in this room, I talked to him from wherever he was outside of Washington, D.C., and he said, coronavirus, don't worry about it. So, manageable numbers. Bottom line, we don't have to worry about this one, right?
Well, obviously you need to take it seriously and do the kinds of things that the CDC and the Department of Homeland Security are doing. But this is not a major threat for the people in the United States, and this is not something that the citizens of the United States right now should be worried about.
All right, not a major threat, not something we should be worried about. And what was the CDC doing back then? They were screening people at the airports who are coming directly from Wuhan, China. And not in all the airports, just a handful here in America. That's it. What else did he say? In the early stages of coronavirus, now that everybody's got to wear a mask, he said, no mask.
Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
You're sure of it? Because people are listening really closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often, there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
So what is it? I remember that interview so well. That's why I basically didn't wear a mask for most of this thing, unless I really, really had to. And that's when somebody was threatening me or giving me a hard time. He changed his tune, of course, on the mask thing.
Please wear a mask.
So he's been all over the place. I'll never forget when he was in the baseball game where he threw that terrible pitch, and he's not even doing it himself. All right, so he's got the book, which seems, it's such an insult to me, quite frankly, and I think to all of us. Cuomo wrote that silly book, and now him. And what's worse, a movie is coming out as well. Oh, and what an ego on this guy, huh? And meet the man. Meet the man. He's been on every TV show known to man, and we're going to meet him all over again. This guy obviously has a problem with the ego, and yeah, a problem with the truth, in my opinion. We'll see. I would like to know how much money he's getting paid for that book, wouldn't you? And how dare he write it during a pandemic? All right, we've got some other things to talk about. 3-day weekend. Did you enjoy it? Woohoo! Kamala sure did, our vice president. Before I go into that, look, we're going to talk about two things that are not making much news because they're embarrassing to the Biden administration. And then we'll talk about two things that are not making news because they're potentially criminal and they involve Joe Biden. All right, first, Kamala. Did you see this tweet? It was totally ridiculous. This is Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy the long weekend. And there she is, Kamala. She just thinks she looks fabulous. I received a more appropriate message from the guy at the rental car place, okay, about Memorial Day. And she is the vice president of the United States. This, by the way, was probably the highlight for her because she took a stab at some comedy at the Naval Academy graduation.
And just ask any Marine today, would she rather carry 20 pounds of batteries or a rolled up solar panel? And I am positive she will tell you a solar panel, and so would he.
You go, girl. Yeah, I get it. Right. We all assume Marines are men. Is that what you're saying? I was a Marine. By the way, we've had female Marines for about a century, so it's no big deal, Madam Vice President. She is a very silly person. Quite frankly, her behavior, if you look at her career, it kind of makes sense. Who made her? Willie Brown, who was, at that point, a married mayor of San Francisco. He was also the Speaker of the California State Assembly, and he had a relationship with single Kamala Harris. He was responsible for some of her key appointments. He helped make her political career. What does she bring to the table besides ego?
Sorry for dripping, but drip is what I do. And one of these days.
Her campaign kept putting these things out when she was running for vice president, getting on and off of corporate jets. It made her, I guess, look and feel so important. I still don't understand, though, what she brought to the table. You know, she ran for president and got absolutely nowhere. She had to drop out before Pete Buttigieg and Andrew Yang. She got no support whatsoever. And the assessments of her campaign, even from her liberal friends in the fake news, devastating. Take a look at some of these quotes that we found in the New York Times, okay? This is my third presidential campaign, and I have never seen an organization treat its staff so poorly, according to a former campaign aide. There was also this, and this is true basically for anybody if you're running. You can't run the country if you can't run your campaign. Message, she was terrible at running her campaign. And then, of course, she stabbed Joe Biden in the front.
I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, you know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
Ooh, that was a knockout punch during the debate in the primary. Dr. Jill Biden was watching very closely, and she didn't like this one bit. We have a quote from a new book. With what he cares about, what he fights for, what he's committed to, you get up there and call him a racist without basis? Go F yourself. In the new book by Edward Isaac Dovere. That's pretty devastating. So why is Kamala Harris there? I have a theory, and I think I'm right. We all know that Barack Obama is calling the shots in the Biden administration. Well, guess what? He and Kamala, the chemistry, you could feel it. You could sense it. All the way back when she was just a state attorney general, these two like each other a lot. All right. What's the other embarrassing story of the weekend for the Biden administration that's getting very little attention, but it's pretty wild? So Joe's going to give a big speech, all right, related to Memorial Day. And you see those cute little kids there? Joe certainly notices them, especially, and I'm sorry, the little girl with the barrettes in her hair.
I'm especially honored to share the stage with Brittany and Jordan and Nathan and Margaret Catherine. I love those barrettes in her hair, man. I tell you what. And look at her. She looks like she's 19 years old, sitting there with her, like a little lady with her legs crossed.
You should not be commenting on a little girl's legs, comparing them to a 19-year-old, right? We all know that. Joe does not know that. We've seen Joe touch young girls, middle-aged women, old women. He's just, it's kind of sad. It's kind of weird. All right, but here's where it gets much thornier, but the media does not care, or they pretend not to care. New revelations from that laptop. It's there, the New York Post, they've done some very important reporting on this. Take a look at this photograph. Joe and Hunter and a bunch of people. That's from that famous trip to China. But take a look at this one, if you would, from April 16th of 2015. Joe is vice president, and he's hanging out at Cafe Milano with a couple of ex-officials from Kazakhstan that Hunter may have wanted to do business with. Hunter, who knows what he actually did for a living, but he was running all over the world and getting paid for it. And here they are hanging out with Kazakhstan ex-officials. Do you think business came up at that meeting? Safe to say, right? But Joe Biden always would deny it, wouldn't he?
Mr. Vice President, how many times have you ever spoken to your son about his overseas business dealings?
I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings.
And so how do you know?
Here's what I know. I know Trump deserves to be investigated. He is violating every basic norm of a president.
Joe gets angry when you ask him about that. When you ask him, hey, did you ever talk to your son about this stuff? He gets angry and very, very defensive. Tells me the reporters are onto something.
What was your role as vice president in charge of policy in Ukraine and your son's job in Ukraine? How is that not a conflict of interest?
It's not a conflict of interest. There's been no indication of any conflict of interest from Ukraine or anywhere else. Period. I'm not gonna respond to that.
Okay, well, here's a little indication of a conflict of interest, potentially. A thank you note to Hunter from what looks like a Burisma official. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and giving an opportunity to meet your father. Also this, very interesting. Once Joe Biden left the vice presidency, what did they do? They cut Hunter's pay basically in half. Now, this is dynamite stuff. But the media, they just don't care. They go on with their regularly scheduled programming. Those questions I showed you, some of them are like 2 years old. Joe Biden does not get pressed on this. I guess it would take them off message. What do they want to talk about? The 9/11 style commission into January 6th.
If Friday's Senate vote on an independent commission to investigate January 6th was a stress test for our democracy, well, then sadly, our democracy failed and failed big time.
You would think that they would want as much information as possible from an independent commission that would give a definitive accounting for one of the most consequential domestic attacks in this country's history. But apparently not.
The reason that they blocked that, as Terry was mentioning, is because they're worried about 2022. They're worried about their primaries being primaried by people that Trump is going to support, and the fact that they feel that they have to pledge loyalty to Trump.
This is what they tell themselves all the time. And you see that one guy? Yes, 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 yes. They all just nod and agree with each other all the time. So if you print out the legislation for this commission, you can see it's not independent. It wouldn't be unbiased. There are all kinds of problems. The first problem is they label everybody there a domestic terrorist. And not everybody there was a domestic terrorist. I actually would like an investigation, but not like this, because we have lots of things we want answered. Remember this moment? I'll never forget it. And maybe you haven't seen it because the fake news, they buried it. But a Trump supporter is desperately asking the police to intercede, to do something.
Why are you letting this happen? Why haven't you called for backup? Where is your backup? This is our damn Capitol building, and y'all are letting it get destroyed on your watch.
It's true. They just stood there in pretty intimidating uniforms, by the way. Very strange. But this is even stranger and far more tragic. What happened to Ashley Babbitt? I want that answered. Who shot her? Why wasn't there a warning? She was unarmed. There's no police department in the country that would justify that kind of shooting. Ashley Babbitt should not have died that way.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.